conservation biologist with over 4 decades of experience in avian ecology, with particular expertise in birds of prey and its conservation. Dr. Vibhu Prakash retired in 2022 as Deputy Director and Principal Scientist at the Bombay Natural History Society. Since 1984, he has devoted much of his professional life to the study and conservation of vultures. In 1997, he was the first scientist to document the catastrophic decline of gyps vultures in India. His subsequent leadership in the BNH's Vulture Conservation Program contributed significantly to identify veterinary diclofenac as the principal cause of this decline and to the developing major conservation interventions, including conservation breeding centers, vulture safe zones, and species recovery programs. He has also made important contributions to India's action plan for vulture conservation and served as a member of Central Zoo Authority from 2006 to 2016. As a committed mentor and as an educator, he has guided numerous postgraduate researchers and supervised 6 PhD scholars. His outstanding contributions to wildlife conservation have been recognized to several prestigious national and international honors, including the Marsh Award for Wildlife Conservation, Royal Bank of Scotland Award for Species Conservation, Prani Mitra Award, Sanctuary Lifetime Wildlife Service Award, and Disney Conservation Hero Award. Based in Vadodara, Gujarat, Dr. Prakash continues to work as an independent raptor biologist, supporting research, conservation, mentoring, and capacity building for the protection of India's remarkable avian biodiversity. His pioneering work on vulture has made an enduring contribution to wildlife conservation in India and has helped shape both scientific understanding and practical conservation strategies for one of the country's most threatened group of species. We are delighted to have you, sir, with us today. And to all the participants here, if there is any questions or any queries, you may type it in the chat box so that we'll be taking it in the end of the section. So now over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the nice introduction. Yeah, I will just upload my presentation and just a minute. How do I do it? Sure. Sorry, can you see my presentation, please?
No, sir,
Hello?
we couldn't see your slide.
Can you see the slides, please?
No, sir, we couldn't see your slides.
Oh.
Sir, can you share the screen and the PPT? Please, only the WebEx window is open.
I'll do it again, sir. Sorry. Can you see it now, please?
Yes, sir, we can see your slide.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for this delay.
Not an issue.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to present on vultures. And as you have already given my introduction, I have worked on raptors and vultures since 1984, and from 2000 onwards, it was mainly on vultures. So I will telling you more about what the vultures are and about their behavior and what happened to them and what all conservation measures have been taken to save them from possible extinction. So vultures are how to remove this. Sorry. Vultures, in fact, are large birds. They are huge birds of prey, and they weigh about 3 to 12 kilograms. There's a they have many species of vultures, and so there is a lot of variation in the. Sorry. So I was saying what I will tell you about what vultures are. They are in fact very large bodied birds. They weigh up to 3 to 12 kilograms. They could be between 2 to 3 feet high, tall, and they are scavengers. And vultures, if you don't see them, what they actually do, they feed on dead animals. They look quite very impressive. In fact, this is true for all the predators and scavengers. Even if you see a tiger feeding, it will not be as impressive as you see a tiger just sitting. Similarly with vultures. See how impressive this vulture looks when it is not actually scavenging. How to move the slides? I don't know. Vultures are obligate scavengers. So that means they never ever kill. They always eat dead meat. And they are very efficient scavengers. So a vulture, whenever a dead body is thrown out in the open, the vultures, the way they search for food, they very quickly locate the dead body and scavenge on it. As you know, a dead body is virtually a culture medium of bacteria and fungus. As soon as that takes place, bacteria and fungus start multiplying in that, and very soon they form spores. And once they have formed spores, they almost become immortal. Then they go to soil and water and pollute. And whenever they come across a healthy host, they spread diseases. But vulture, because they are very efficient in searching for food, they quickly find the dead animals and they feed on everything which is perishable, the meat. So there's nothing for bacteria and fungus to survive on. And this is how they were preventing spread of diseases. Vultures are social bird, although they are big and they are heavy birds, but they are very good at soaring. So they are not very good at flap flying, but once they flap fly and come into the thermals, they can soar effortlessly without spending energy, and they can go long distances in search of food. And while they are social birds, so they do all the activities together, where they are soaring, whether they are feeding, whether they are nesting, they all do it together. So when they are soaring in the sky, the vultures also look at each other as well as they look down to see whether other mammalian scavengers or predators, if they are going in one direction. So one of the some few vultures will come down a bit and then they will investigate. And if they locate a carcass, then they will not come down immediately, but they will start taking tight circles, thereby indicating to others which are flying in the sky that come, there's food. And then they will descend and they will this usually have a cascading effect, and vultures from long distance, it may from hundreds of kilometers, then they can come and they can cover up the carcass. They feed on the carcass and then go back. In fact, a group of 60, 70 vultures can finish off a carcass of a full-grown adult cow within minutes. So they are very efficient and they were doing a very a good job to prevent diseases. Vultures are they are probably the only vertebrates which have evolved for scavenging. And Vultures can eat almost 40 to 50% of the body weight in one go, whereas other scavengers and predators can eat only 5% of the body weight. So vultures, whenever they get food, they gorge themselves, then they can go without food for days together. Because, for vultures, food is not assured. And vultures are highly mobile. Once they get into thermals, they can travel hundreds of kilometers in search of food, whereas other mammalian predators or scavengers can hardly move for 5-10 kilometers. So vultures, whenever they come across food, even if they stay far away, they can go there, finish the meat, and come back. That's how they have been preventing spread of diseases, both in humans as well as in animals. Vultures also feed. They are social birds, so all their activities are synchronized. So where they're feeding, they're nesting, or they're flying. And since they are social birds, there is hardly any fights even when they are feeding. They don't really injure each other. And the vultures have a very muscular tongue, which is backwardly serrated, and it has a depression in midwheel. So they can actually serve food. So they can feed very fast and before the other mammalian predators can disturb them. We have over 23 species of vultures worldwide. Out of them, 16 occur in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And all these 16 vultures, still about 2000, none of them were at the risk of, had very comfortable conservation status. But after 2000, now we have about 11 out of 16 species which are threatened with extinction. And it has all happened because of the poisoning of their principal food, the meat of large animals. In most of the places, because of poisoning, and in some parts in Africa, it's because of also because of persecution. In India, we have 9 species of vultures, and they all feed on the same uh, food source, that is the dead animal, that is the carcasses, but they don't compete with each other. They exploit the carcass differently. The first 2 species, the cinereous vulture and the king vulture, they are they have very powerful beak, and so they can actually tear off the hide of a carcass. So they usually feed on the tough muscle and the tendons attached to them. So these 2 species, because their food is not widely available, so their population is never very high. They are usually in two, threes, or of a few of them. The cinereous vulture is migratory, which comes only during the winters, and it is also a tree nester, like the king vulture. The king vulture is a resident bird. It's a tree nester, and it also has a very powerful beak, so it can open up the hide of a carcass. You know how tough the hide is, but because they have strong bill, they can open up the carcass. And then we have this bearded vulture. This is found in high mountains, and it really comes to the plains. But this vulture specializes in feeding on bones. So when other vultures have finished up the meat on the carcass, they come and they feed on the small bones. Then the big bones they take in the talons and throw on the rocks. And when they break, they eat the bones as well as the bone marrow which is there in the bones. So they are, but they are usually not found in the plains. So all the vulture species, although they exploit the food differently, and but if any species is not there, the vultures can still manage to open up the carcass and feed on it. But if all the species are there, the exploitation becomes easier for the vultures. So then we have these gyp species of vultures. Gyp species of vultures are the real vultures, and I will be talking mostly about these species of vultures. They actually form 99% of the population of vultures wherever they occur. So they are huge birds. They weigh about 5 kilos to about 12 kilos, and they are huge. They have long neck and rounded head. Usually their neck and head are without the feathers. They have very fine hair-like feathers on the neck and the head, and they have very strong neck and strong bill and very broad body. They can actually go inside the body of a carcass and they feed on the soft tissues and internal organs. The gyp species of vultures are very fast feeders and they have an unusual adaptation in their tongue. Like their tongue is very muscular. It is backwardly serrated and it has got depression in middle. So they can actually slurp the meat. So they feed very fast because they have to also compete with other scavengers. And these vultures, once they have fed, they can go without food for 15, 20 days without any problem. And they have a crop. This is situated at the base of the neck, in which they store their food. But this food gets digested within 24 hours, and then uh, uh, it is stored in their fat. So they build up fat by eating up the gorging food. The vultures, because they are also raptors, but they don't have, they do have musculatures in the feet and the bill, like the other raptors, but they don't have the ability to catch live prey. But their feet are still strong. They are very wide, and they don't have curved claws like other raptors are. And these the vultures are they can walk a lot on the they walk a lot instead of catching prey. They are long-living and slow-breeding birds. The vultures reach adulthood only when they are 5 to 6 years old, and then they lay only one egg per year, and out of them only 50% reach to the adulthood. So they are very, very slow breeding, and they can live up to 35, 40 years without any problem. So so they have very high mortality in juveniles, but once they reach adulthood, they almost never seem to die. They live very long for 35, 40 years. They and they pair for life. Once they pair for life when they are about 2 to 3 years old, and then they always are together. But if one of the dies, it is almost replaced almost immediately. So all these gyps vultures, they require adult plumage only then they are 5 to 6 years old. So you can easily age them till they are 5 to 6 years old. And beyond that, it's impossible to age them because then a 5 years old or a 30-year-old vulture will do the same. So the adult vulture usually have very rounded feathers. If you see their feathers, they are very rounded. In fact, all the feathers, even the coverts, the flight feathers, the tail feathers, are very rounded, and they are almost of the same age, so they make a very smooth wing lining. And they at the base of their neck, there are a bunch of feathers which are called ruff. So they become white in adults, whereas in juveniles they are feathery. In juveniles, the shape of the feathers is very pointed and narrow, as you can see from here. Unlike uh, in adults, where these feathers are very rounded, but here they are very pointed. Generally, the wings are very pointed, and all even the coverts are pointed, but usually they are streaked. And the vultures which are between first year and the 5 to 6 and the adults, they usually have a mixture of pointed feathers as well as rounded feathers. So this is how it's easy to age them, and you can age them till they are 5 years old. After them, it becomes impossible to age them. So the birds which are more than 1 year old and less than 5 years old are called subadults, and they don't breed. They only adults start breeding. So this is a white-backed vulture. It's an adult, and it's all dark. It has got a bluish sheen. It's a blackish bluish, and the hair on the top, you see, it's a juvenile vulture. And adults and juvenile look very different. They almost look like different species. So we have to be very careful in identifying them. So as I said, juveniles are usually paler than the adults, and their feathers are very pointed and they are streaked, whereas adults, the wings are rounded, and the ruff, which is the a bunch of feathers at the back of the neck, is very cottony, whereas in juveniles is very spindly. The white-backed vultures, only the adults have white-backed and rump, and that you can see only when they open up the wings. So white-backed vultures, they reach adulthood by 4 to 5 years old, and they, like typical gyp species, lay one egg every year, and out of them only about 50% only will survive to adulthood. So their population growth is usually very, very slow. And white-backed vultures nest on trees, whereas this vulture is a long-billed vulture. These vultures usually are seen on the cliffs, and they are seen towards more forested areas. They also have the similar role like the white-backed vulture, but they are seen in the forest. This vulture is much paler than a white-backed vulture. It is brownish, and its bill is very pale. You would have noticed that the white-backed vulture has a very grayish brown bill. So they are cliff nesters, and they usually nest on cliffs and on hillsides. So here also the adults and juveniles look very different. The juveniles is very streaky, whereas adults have broad wing covers and they are edged pale, but the juveniles are very streaky. Then the third gyp species of vultures, which are residents, that is a slender-billed vulture. This vulture is probably the rarest vulture in the world, and we have just about 1,000 pairs left in the wild. This vulture is found north of Gangetic Plain. It was earlier found from Himachal Pradesh, still Arunachal Pradesh, but now it is mostly confined to northeast India. This vulture and long-billed vulture were considered a same species till about 2002 when they were split into two different species. The long-billed vulture is found only south of Gangetic Plains and whereas this vulture is found north of Gangetic Plain. White-backed vultures are actually found from 2,000 meters up in the mountains uh, till the tip of the country and also in the northeast India. And here the slender vulture also the adults and juveniles are very different. Where adults have are darker and the juveniles are much paler and they are very streaky. So all the three species, the white-rumped or the white-backed, long-billed, and slender-billed vulture, they are resident to the country. And now I will talk about the migratory or the wintering vultures which come in our country during the winters, and they are the Himalayan griffin and the Eurasian griffin. The Himalayan griffin a small part of his population also breeds in the country. Himalayan griffin is probably the largest vulture in the world. It can weigh about 12 kilos. And this vulture also the juveniles are very dark and adults are very pale. Uh, Except for the wing feathers, they are all almost white. Even the bill and the tassels are very pale. And these vultures nest in the hills, and they also lay one egg, and uh, they nest almost every alternate year because it takes almost 7, 8 months of nesting. They lay one egg, and the incubation period is over 55 days, and it takes about 4 to 5 months for the nestling to grow up. So it's a very big nesting cycle, and it is true for all the gyp species of vultures. So this is a Eurasian griffin. This is also a wintering bird. It breeds mainly in Central Asia and Europe, and it winters only in our country. In case of Himalayan vulture and Eurasian griffin, only the juveniles and the sub-adult they come in the plains during winter, where their adults are sedentary, so they don't usually come down. So here in Eurasian griffin also, the juveniles are very streaky. They are they have a very rusty brown color, whereas adults are much paler. And adults have yellow eyes and their seal. This part just above the bill is black and the bill is yellow. So they are very distinctive when they are in adult plumage. So when you see a congregation of vultures, usually Himalayan griffin they look very big. The slender bill vultures, you can see they have very black neck and very pale body, whereas the white-backed vultures have dark bodies and brown neck and head. Here you can see how big the Himalayan griffins look like. And this is a slender bill vulture, very dark neck and brown body. Then we come to the very smallest vulture, which is called Egyptian vulture. This vulture it probably weighs about 2.5 kilos or so, and this vulture specializes in feeding on the leftovers when the other vultures have fed on a big carcass, and they feed on the tendons and the muscles attached to the bones. But they also do a very important job of feeding on the scats of all the mammalian scavengers which come to feed on the carcasses. So the entire vulture guild, they do a thorough cleaning job, so nothing remains to putrefy. So the Egyptian vulture, we have two races of Egyptian vulture. One race is largely migratory, and when it comes down to in winters, you can see it has got a gray tipped bill, whereas the race which is resident, which is called Gingianus, has a very pale bill. And they can also interbreed, but the largely the Parachnopterus, the nominate race, comes from is wintering. So vultures had a very important socio-economic significance in our country. In our country, we have a huge population of cattle, and because we didn't have an organized carcass disposal system, so the cattle was thrown out in the open, and the vultures will feed on them. So we had a community of people from the lowest strata of the society. This community would make their living out of selling the bones and the hide. The bones they will sell to the gelatin industry and the hide to the leather industry, and that's how they will make their money. These scavengers had almost a commensal relationship with the vultures. These skinners would come in out in the morning and they would look for the vultures. If they see vultures soaring anywhere, they would go towards that, and they will sure enough find a carcass, which they will quickly skin, and then they will leave the rest of the body for the vultures to come and finish off the meat. The vultures will come immediately and finish off everything, and then they will collect the bones, which they will sell to the gelatin industry. But now, unfortunately, we have lost most of the vultures since mid 90s, and so these guys really face problems, and most of them are now out of job. Now, what happens whenever a carcass is thrown out of the in the open? In absence of the vultures, they find it difficult to locate the carcass, and when they locate the carcass, they find that it is almost the skin is almost damaged by the dogs, so they don't get fetch good price for the hide. So they are now getting they are getting out of business. So vultures also have a very important significance in our culture. In Parsi communities, for Parsi society, they have a very important role to play because Parsis they consider uh, death to be an act of shaitan. So they don't offer their body to the elements because elements are sacred to them: the fire, the water, and the air. So what they do, they ritualized it. They have structures called dogma where put their dead bodies, and vultures come and do the job. But since vultures are not there, they also face very difficulty in disposing of the body. And vultures also played a very important part of Hindu mythology also. As you know, Jatayu and Sampati played a very important role in locating Mother Sita and also telling Ram where uh, Sita was. So vultures were always important in our mythology as well as in our culture. So vultures were very common in our country. It's now very difficult to imagine how common they used to be. We had an estimate about 4 crore vultures in the country. And this picture is taken by a colleague of mine who was who took it in 2000 in 1980 when he was working for the Indian Air Force to suggest measures for prevention of bird strike. That time, vultures were a very big problem to the aircraft. So you see in this picture that every inch of space is occupied by vultures, even on the top of the water tank and top of the buildings and everywhere with the vultures. And this is a slaughterhouse waste dump. And whatever waste were thrown out, vultures will finish off immediately. And there was hardly any stench. You know what is stench is? Really bacterial and fungal action on the organic matter. But vultures were such efficient scavengers that they would finish off everything and nothing would left to putrefy. But they are all gone and we have lost vulture population. I will tell you what happened. So when any species which occurs in huge numbers, like vultures, when there were 4 crore vultures, if you are not doing regular monitoring, it will be impossible to tell whether the population is increasing or declining. So even when 50% of the vultures were lost, it was difficult to say whether their population is declining because even 50 lakhs is a huge number. So what happened that Bombay Natural Society was monitoring vultures and raptor population across the country in national parks, protected areas, outside protected areas, along the highways, and at car customs. So they noticed that the vulture population was declining in mid 90s in Kevladev National Park, Bharatpur, where the research was being carried out on raptors and vultures. So during late 80s, there were over 350 nests of white-backed vulture, all the white-rumped vulture in the park, in just 29 square kilometers. But by mid-90s, only 150 left, and by 2000, all were gone. So that's the time when Bombay Natural Research Society raised the alarm that the vulture population is declining. It has crashed all over. And so this we could find out because monitoring of vulture population and raptors were going on. So and because they were also monitoring raptor and vulture population across the country, and they would carry out raptor and vulture surveys every 4 years. So they had an idea of the trend in vulture populations. So they knew that by by 2000 we had lost about 95% of the population of all the 3 species of vultures, and by 2007 99.9% of the population was lost. And vultures are slow breeding and long living vultures, and in subspecies the rate of annual mortality is less than 5%. And if it becomes more than 5%, then extinction becomes a possibility. And we were looking at a decline of population of over 40% in white-rumped vulture and over 15% in long-billed and slender-billed vulture. So the extinction was really a possibility. So when the vultures population vanished, this is what uh, So when vultures were there, the carcass would never be rotting like the ones you have seen here. And all this white you see is actually the maggots, and which go into flies and they cause disease. What we don't directly see is the fungus and bacteria which multiply in them in millions, form spores and go into the water and soil and cause diseases. So vultures were finishing them off before this could happen. So now, whatever carcasses remain, they rot and they can cause diseases. Similarly, when vultures were there, whenever a cattle was thrown out in the carcass was thrown out in the open, they would come in huge number. They will cover up the carcass, and the free-ranging dog will not get any chance to get at the carcass. But now, since vultures, in the absence of vultures, the dogs get plenty of food to eat, and dogs are like vermin. So whenever there is food abundance, they have bigger litter size, and dogs are also cannibals. So usually they litter at isolated areas where other dogs cannot go, because otherwise they will kill the pups. So, but now because of the food abundance, you see dogs littering at the carcass dumps in the rib cages of the cattle, and the pups, which they actually don't come in contact with humans and the wildlife. So these pups, when they grow up, they are ferocious and they attack humans and wildlife whenever they come across them. And dogs carry all kinds of disease. Rabies is one of them. So with the decline of vulture population, human and animal health has become taken serious beating. Although it's very difficult to quantify that what percent of increase in rabies incidences are because of the crash in vulture population, and because the dog population was as such very high, and there's no historical data on their population. But it is very evident that the vulture dog population has really gone up since the vulture population crashed. So when vulture population crashed, we started looking for what was the reason, and we found that there was very high mortality. Found vultures dead all over in the bushes, all around. And when a vulture dies on a tall tree, and if you don't look closely look at it, you will not notice that the dead vulture is on the tree. But when we started looking all around, we saw dead vultures everywhere. And there was massive nesting failure. Vultures would also lay eggs, but because of the mortality of adults or the chick, there was rapid breeding failure. So we tried to look at what all ecological reasons could be for the crash in vulture population. So we thought maybe paucity of food is a problem, but when we did road transit surveys and we do surveys for cattle carcasses and food availability to vultures, we found that all the food availability has declined, but it was still enough to support a large population of vultures. And only in 5% of the carcasses we found there were vultures. The rest of the carcasses being attended to by dogs, or there were many carcasses which were not attended to by any scavengers. Then we thought maybe habitat loss could have caused the crash in population, because vultures are found from desert to evergreen forest, and they can exploit any kind of habitat. So wherever they are found, they usually try to occupy the tallest tree. So even in desert, you see them occupying the kijdi tree about 30 feet high, but in an evergreen forest, you can be occupying a 200 feet high tree. So habitat loss was not appeared to be a problem for vulture crash in vulture population. Then we also looked at chemical contamination, and because a lot of bird population had crashed in the world because of the use of pesticides. Like we almost lost falcon because the DDT was introduced. But when we looked at the pesticide load in the tissues of vultures and all, and then we found that there were not enough pesticide, which can cause even breeding failure. So we also ruled out chemical contamination. Then we thought maybe a disease is killing vultures, because vultures would appear very sick before they died. So, and then we started investigating on that, and we could isolate a very potent herpes virus, but we could not prove whether that was causing the uh, crash in population. But in the meantime, we found that whenever we saw vultures, they would be sitting with drooping necks, very ruffled feathers. And once they show these symptoms, they would usually die within 7 to 8 days. And if you disturb these vultures when they show the symptom, they will fly away and then you sit somewhere, and then gradually they will become lethargic and die. And when we conducted postmortems, we found that there were uric acid deposits on their visceral organs. And uric acid deposits happens whenever there is renal failure and the body cannot excrete out uric acid, and it gets deposited on the visceral organs. So and they die a very painful death. So when we saw that in India, the vultures were dying of visceral gout and renal failure. The scientists, American scientists working in Pakistan, also had they also found similar symptoms in vultures. And but they also additionally found that the vultures which had died of visceral gout also had residues of diclofenac, a non-steroidal drug which is given to cattle in pain and inflammation. So what they did, they experimentally fed vultures on diclofenac through orally through gavage as well as through buffalo meat, and they could create symptoms that they were seen in the wild. So it was very clear indication the vultures were indeed dying of diclofenac poisoning. So when they found that diclofenac was problem there, we also looked at the tissue samples which we had restored in different in the country, and we found that 76% of our vultures had died of visceral gout, and all that 76% of the vultures, when we tested for the presence of diclofenac, they were positive of that. And so and then it was clear that diclofenac could be killing them. But we knew that the vultures were dying of diclofenac, it was very difficult to believe that such a huge population of vultures could have been killed by just the use of one drug. Because diclofenac is a very effective drug for cattle and for humans, because once you give diclofenac to cattle, it gets relief in pain within 15 minutes because this drug breaks blood-brain barrier. But if the drug is given to a cattle and if a cattle dies within 72 hours and then the vultures feed on it, then the vultures will get exposed to the drug because they feed on this soft tissues and internal organs, and then the vultures will die. So it was too much of a coincidence to think that the vultures were dying of diclofenac poisoning. So we did a mathematical modeling with the help of a Professor Rees Green from Cambridge University, and to find out how much diclofenac was in fact needed to cause see the kind of crash in vulture population which we have seen. So he came out with a figure that if based on diclofenac toxicity and how often the vulture feed and how long they can travel to feed, he said that if less than 1% of the carcasses are diclofenac, it can cause the kind of crash in population which we have seen. And when we did carcass sampling across this country, we found that over 10% of the carcasses had diclofenac. So it was very clear that diclofenac was indeed killing vultures. And diclofenac is a very popular drug and very easily available. So, there are two things. One is there are many causes of mortality. When a vulture can die of electrocution, vulture can die when a train runs over it, or vulture can die of a tree is cut down, or vulture crashes in the wall. But that doesn't cause crash in population. Crash in population happens when there is very high adult mortality. The juvenile and the subadult mortality is anyway very high in these long living birds, almost 50% of them in the first year. So population crashes when there's crash in the adult population, and that's what diclofenac was doing. That's why we say that diclofenac is the only cause of crash in vulture population, not of mortality. There can be many reasons of mortality. So once we knew that the vultures were dying of diclofenac and population has crashed by over 99%, we went to Government of India, and Government of India was very receptive, and they immediately understood the gravity of the population, and they came out with a vulture recovery plan and a vulture action plan in 2006. And they gave three important recommendations. One was to identify a safe alternative to diclofenac, because if diclofenac was very useful drug for cattle industry, and if it is removed, then there should be some alternative for that. So we had to find a new alternative for diclofenac. Then ban on diclofenac was required, because unless you ban the drug, vultures cannot be saved. And then it was felt that vultures were dying at a very fast pace, and we thought that they may go extinct very fast, and there were no vultures in captivity. So it was decided to have a captive keep vultures in captivity and do a conservation breeding program. Conservation breeding program is no substitute to saving species in wild, but it is an insurance against extinction. If a If things are not such that you cannot save them in the wild, then this is a very good option for saving them, saving the species from extinction. So that's why conservation breeding program was also taken up. So we looked for a safe drug for vultures. We did a global survey and we found that one drug was there called meloxicam, which has not caused any mortality in vultures and raptors in the world. So we did a safety testing of meloxicam on our vultures with the help of Indian Veterinary Research Institute, and we found that the drug didn't cause any mortality in vultures. Whenever there is NSAID, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug toxicity, then the uric acid levels in the blood really go up. But so if you give diclofenac to a vulture, the uric acid levels will go up, shoot up. But when meloxicam is given, nothing happens. Meloxicam is a second generation drug with very few side effects. The only downside it is slow acting and it is non-pyretic. It is non-antipyretic. So you have to give another drug to bring down the fever. Nevertheless, it's a second generation drug and very effective. So the government of India said that the meloxicam in 2006, they said that the diclofenac should be banned in veterinary use and meloxicam should be used instead. So that was very good for vultures. But very soon we realized that the vultures were still dying, and that was because people who treat vultures in our country, many of them, a large number of them, are not actually veterinarians. They are the ones who just know anything about drugs. They start treating the cattle, and they were using human formulation which were available in multi-dose vials. They were treating cattle, and it was again causing mortality. Actually, for humans, we require only 3 ml ampule for a single dose. But the drug companies were manufacturing the large dose vials out of their profit. So government of India finally banned the multi-dose vials for human use also, and asked to manufacture only single dose vial, and that was very helpful for the conservation of vultures. So after conservation measures were taken by after 2012, the vulture population has started stabilizing, and it might be increasing a bit. But since they are very slow breeding birds, the increase in population will show after some time. Vultures can double their population in 10 years because they have slow breeding. So even all the mortality factors are removed, it will take time before we'll know the population is really increasing. So after diclofenac, we found that there were 3 other drugs which were causing mortality in vultures. They were ketoprofen, aceclofenac, and nimesulide. So we also requested Government of India to ban these 3 drugs for vulture conservation, which were eventually done, which took some time. So now there's 14 different molecules available in the market of NSAIDs, but their safety testing has been done on vultures. So Government of India, Ministry of Environment and Forest asked the Indian Veterinary Research Institute in collaboration with BNHS and other organization to test these drugs on vultures. So they have found that uh, they uh, they found that ketoprofen, encephalomaniac, nimesulide is toxic, but they also found that there is a drug called tolfenoic acid and analgin is safe to vultures, and that can be administered to cattle, and which it will have no effect if the vultures feed on such dead cattle. So then the vulture conservation breeding program was initiated in 2004 because it was thought that if conservation breeding program is not initiated, vultures might go extinct. So when we thought of doing a conservation breeding program, the immediate question was how many we should breed, because breeding any species is not difficult if you give them the right conditions. So now did a mathematical modeling, and we came out with a figure of 600 pairs of each of the 3 species. If they can be released in the wild, they will form a self-sustaining, genetically diverse population. And this should be done when the environment is free of drugs. So to get this population, we thought of establishing 6 different centers in the country, and from each center, we should be able to release 100 pairs of each of these species in the wild. And to get 100 pairs of the 3 species, we thought of having 25 pairs of each of the 3 species in each centers. From that, we'll produce 100 pairs, and then that will be released in the wild. But vultures are slow breeding and long living bird. and you can age them only till they are 5 years, 5 to 6 years old. So that when the conservation breeding program started, only nestlings or juveniles were collected. So it took them 5 6 years to start breeding in the breeding centers. Then the first F1 generation was also used as a founder population, and only the second generation birds who could be start releasing in the wild. So it is a very long term, about 25 years program because of the nature of the vultures. So that's how it took a lot of time for vulture conservation breeding program to come up. And again, I tell you, conservation breeding program cannot bring as many vultures as they were, but it can certainly stop the species from getting extinction. So these three species were considered for conservation breeding: the white-backed or the white-rumped vulture, long-billed or all the Indian vulture, and the slender-billed vulture. So now we have 8 different centers in the country. One is in Pinjore in Haryana, one is in Rajabad Kawa, West Bengal, one is in Rani in West Bengal, in Assam, and one is in Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh. These 4 centers are being run by Bombay Natural Society in collaboration with the state forest departments and Central Zoo Authority. Rest of the 4 centers are being run by the state forest departments and the zoos and the Central Zoo Authority. So now the centers have been very successful in breeding. And so Central Zoo Authority fortunately came out with a manual of conservation breeding for vultures. And this manual is very useful. It's useful for holding for anybody who wants to start a conservation breeding program and run a conservation program, and also do a release reintroduction program after doing that. And this manual of Central Zoo Authority also ensures there's uniformity in management of all the centers, vulture centers. Now we have got good number of vultures, over 800 vultures in different centers, but you see most of them are in the centers run by BNHS, and the good number of vulture chicks are also produced in all the three centers. So now after so many years, the conservation breeding started in 2004. After so many years now, the reintroduction program has had also being initiated. The reintroduction program was thought of in 2016, and it was thought that a soft release will be initiated. Soft release is when you release vultures after vultures or any animal while keeping them in captivity in the area where they have to be released, and then there will be interaction with the wild population also of these vultures. So this is how the release program were initiated and were done. And the first release were done on a Himalayan griffin, which are not critically endangered, because first it was thought that vultures which are kept in captivity, they cannot fly up when they release, or they cannot survive. So for that, we first released Himalayan griffin. Two of with Himalayan griffin, we found they were very successful in the wild. And then now the release of critically endangered species have started. But before starting the release program, a vulture safe zone program was also initiated. Vulture Safe Zone program, the main goals are to protect remaining wild population of vultures and to establish areas where captive bred vultures can be released in the wild, which are free of drugs and other potential threat to vultures. So Vulture Safe Zone are established by doing targeted advocacy programs with various stakeholders, especially the drug controllers, the animal husbandry people, the drug sellers, and the cattle owners. We try to ensure that the drugs are not being used in this area and the vultures are not harmed by any other method. Then only the vultures are released in the wild. So far, there are 8 provisional vulture safe zones which are there in the country, and the work has been going on in them. So a vulture safe zone can be declared only if in 2 consecutive years there's no toxic drug is found in that area and no vulture is died because of visceral gout. Vulture population in the area is either increasing or stabilizing, and or if we release 50 free ranging birds in the area with GPS tagging, and none of them die within a year of release. So then area can be considered as a vulture safe zone. So the reintroduction program of critically endangered birds have now started from 2020, and now vultures are being released regularly. First, they were released from Pinjore and Rajabhat Kawa in West Bengal, and now they have been released from other area in other areas also, like in Maharashtra and Assam. And over 100 vultures have been released, and uh, we must understand that the vultures which are released from captivity, there will be mortality, because it is almost like vultures fledging from the nest. So they have problems in finding food, or they collide somewhere and then they time to get used to the environment. But fortunately, many of the vultures which are released recently have managed to survive, and they have been flying around. They have fly hundreds of kilometers, and they could join wide flock of vultures and have also been foraging with them. So conservation breeding program, reintroduction program appears to be quite successful, and hopefully vultures will be able to survive. So what is the future of vulture conservation? Government of India very proactively brought an action plan for vulture conservation in 2020. So it actually gave important guidelines for conservation efforts for the next 5 years. And good thing is that action plan is based on the research finding on vulture conservation issues over the years. So the major thrust of the Vulture Conservation Action Plan was, of course, prevention of poisoning of cattle carcasses by aniseeds and other drugs, because that was a major problem which has caused crash in the population. Then it also said support regular monitoring of vulture should be done across the country, because that's very important to find out whether the population is increasing or decreasing. And it's important to establish vulture safe zones, at least in one in each state, to protect the surviving wild population, as well as to have areas where the wild vultures, where captive wild vultures could be released. And the action plan also gave a very important recommendation that we must document other causes of mortality, like mortality by electrocution or military mortality by indirect poisoning, like where people poison carcasses to kill other predators, and vultures become unintended victims. So that can also have impact on this very small population that we have in the country. Of course, drugs are very important, but these factors could also become very important. So, as a result of the Vulture Action Plan, the drugs aciclovir and ketoprofen were banned in 2023, and niposolide was also banned in 2024, which is very good news for vultures, because if these drugs are not there, vultures will be able to survive. Although this removal of these drugs will take time, but the action has been taken, and so it will be good for the survival of the vultures. Well, vulture conservation is very challenging, because vultures are very slow breeding birds. Their population doubles up only in 10 years. So, if they reach 5 to 6 years, then only they start breeding. They lay one egg per year, only 50% of them survive. And if the annual mortality rate increases by more than 5%, extinction becomes possibility. And we were looking at this mortality rate of over 43%. It has already gone down, but still, because the population is still strong, still very small, the dangers still exist. Diclofenac for veterinary use were banned in 2006, but still some diclofenac for human use still keeps filtering in veterinary use, which is a problem. And it took almost 10 years to ban the three drugs which are toxic for vultures, like ketoprofen, aciclovir, and nimesulide. So any quick action is required for saving these vultures. But we are hopeful with successful breeding programs, successful release programs, and ban on toxic drugs. Thank you very much. That's all I had to say. And I must acknowledge that Bombay Natural Society is leading the vulture conservation efforts, and because of them, we have reached so far in vulture conservation. Ministry of Environment and Forest have been very proactive in vulture conservation, more than for any other species, and we really thank them for that. Royal Society Protection of Birds of UK has been giving financial and technical support for the program. Darwin Initiative Survival also supported a program for by funding in the initial years. And International Center of Birds of Prey UK provided support in captive breeding. Zoological Society of London in veterinary care. Indian Veterinary Institute Research Institute is very supportive in veterinary care as well as drug testing. Wildlife Institute of India for all kind of help in vulture conservation, and the forest departments have been very supportive. Thank you very much. This is all I have to say, and I will be happy to answer any questions if you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your informative webinar talk. I would like to ask the participant, is there any questions you wanted to ask to Vibhu, sir? Kindly unmute yourself, Kriti Sharma. You're not audible to us. Ma'am, you have any question to ask? Okay, let me ask from my side, sir. Since we have identified diclofenac as one of the major driver for the population decline in the chip species, like what would be you think like other hidden threats that can stop the fully recovery of the species populations? And are we addressing, or we started addressing to it?
See, drugs are the main cause. There's although they have been banned, but still they are a problem. And you know, one carcass with the presence of these drugs can kill large number of vultures. There's so drugs are the real cause of crash in population. There are many causes of mortality, like electrocution is certainly becoming a problem these days. It is a problem. It has been a problem for all large birds, which has caused mortality. And other causes, as I said, is unintentional poisoning of carcasses for killing, predators or something, which vultures come and feed on them, and then they die. So a lot of measures were being taken, for prevention of electrocution, not only by people who are working with vultures, but people who are working on various other species. So that has been, there was a lot of awareness about that also. And about unintentional poisoning, also efforts are being taken to make sure. And unintentional poisoning, the only thing you can do is more awareness. And the important thing is that the supply of drugs, either veterinary drugs or pesticides, should be very regulated, so that these potent drugs or pesticides don't come in hands of people who don't know how to use them properly. So this will also prevent unintentional poisoning a lot. So I think as in Assam, a lot of steps have been taken to uh, prevent this, because a lot of cases happened in Assam over the years. And I think over 600-700 vultures in 5-6 years died there.
there any questions from participants, sir? If there is no more question, like with this, we come to the end of this section. Thank you, sir,
Thank you.
for joining us today. And we hope we'll meet you next section of CZA Eco Talks. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.